Welcome everyone to Student Voices Matter, the path to civic engagement and voting for youth with disabilities. I'd like to introduce you all to our speakers for this session. Christy Aspie is an attorney and program director at Disability Rights New York. Part of Christy's focus at DRNY is getting people registered to vote and providing education to the disability community and those who serve the disability community about voting and the importance of civic engagement through our voting process. Shain Anderson is the statewide engagement coordinator at Young Leaders and Advocates Network. I'd also like to thank our closed captioner for being here today. And I encourage you all to complete the evaluation for today's conference. I will put a link to it in the chat box, and you'll also receive a copy via email. I will now pass it off to our presenters to begin. Thank you.
Well, first of all, thank you all for attending, and thank you to the professionals that are here with us today. So my name is Shain Anderson, and I am the statewide engagement coordinator for the Young Leaders and Advocates Network. And today we're going to be talking about student voices matter and why civic engagement and students and civic engagement for young people matters. So if we could go with the next slide, please. So a little bit about me. As I said, I am the statewide engagement coordinator, and Young Leaders and Advocates Network exists to raise the voice of young people throughout New York State, because we have found that people with disabilities and young people with disabilities specifically are marginalized communities. So what we're saying is, you know what, young people need to have a voice in those decisions that affect them and a voice in the policies that affect them. So, next slide, please, if we could. Thank you. Again, this is a bit about the Young Leaders and Advocates Network. It's a graphic of people with disabilities. It says nothing about us without us. Again, this is simply saying that young people, if we want effective policies, young people need to be at the table so they are authentically and meaningfully involved in the decisions that affect them. The next slide, if we could. So why do we talk about self-advocacy? Why is it important for young people? Because young people are going to grow up and be the change makers that they need to see. They're going to encounter barriers. They're going to have obstacles. They're going to encounter policies that may or may not address their needs. So in this PowerPoint, in this presentation, we hope to convey why it's important for young people to be engaged and be change makers, to learn about self-advocacy, and why it's important for teachers and their allies to support them in engaging with self-advocacy. And next slide, please, if we could. So first of all, I think we're going to be talking a lot about self-advocacy and a lot about civic engagement. But what do we mean when we say self-advocacy? It is the action of representing one's views or one's interests. And for the people who are low vision, visually impaired, what you see is a collection of dolls, and there is like a wooden doll highlighted there. So self-advocacy is about representing one's views or one's interests, but there's more to it than that as well. It's about having the skills to articulate the supports you need and how to go about getting those supports. And so that's really critical. Next slide, please, if we could. So civic engagement, what is that? That, again, what you see is you see a slide of 4 interchange arms, interlocking arms, and it's in any individual or group activity to address an issue of public concern. And again, self-advocacy and civic engagement go hand in hand, because when you engage in civic engagement, you are advocating. Self-advocacy is a huge part of that. And it's really critical that we start embracing that for young people. Next slide, if we could. So why youth-led self-advocacy specifically? So first of all, youth-led self-advocacy looks different than adult-led self-advocacy. But really critical, what it means is youth are in the driver's seat when they are talking about issues that matter to them, when they're discussing issues of concern. And we do that because we want to give students, allow students to experience agency in their own lives. Okay, so youth-led means managed and coordinated by young people. But here's the thing, and this is really critical. It does not mean completely independent of adults or allies or older peers, because support is essential. It is under the guidance of those older individuals, but the youth take the lead in deciding what matters to them. So next slide, please. Good. So what you have here is a graphic of two African-American women, their fists raised, their arms raised in protest. And again, this is to articulate, again, what we were talking about more in the last slide. What does youth-led self-advocacy look like? It's intentional, number one, okay? It is having youth having an equal voice in the actions and in the planning for what affects them. But again, it's with support. It's with support. It's letting them realize that they can take actions to support their lives, and they can be the drivers of change in their communities around the issues that affect them. So next slide, if we could. So 4 rules of authentic self-advocacy. Okay, and this is important when we're talking about youth, because self-advocacy can be intimidating. Okay, it's a practiced skill. It's a learned skill. So first, it's get to know yourself as a young person. What are your skills? What are your weaknesses? What do you want to work on? What are your goals? Where do you want to go? This is one of the first steps. And again, these are things that I'll talk about this later in the presentation, but these are things that teachers and counselors can support in asking youth those questions of where do you want to go? What are your skills? Let's embrace those skills. What do you want to work on? The second one is learning your rights and responsibilities as a young person and a young person with a disability. Specifically, what are your rights in the classroom? What are your responsibilities in the classroom? What about the larger community? For example, things like reasonable accommodations, that you have the right to ask for those. The third rule is speak up. And this goes to self-advocacy. If you have a question, ask it. Whether it's your teacher or someone in authority, you can ask those things. And the last one, but by no means the least, is team up. Okay, because life is a team sport. So you're going to get those people around you to assist you with the first 3. Okay, so if you do those 4 things, and you as teachers and advocates stress those 4 things and encourage the exercising of those 4 things, that you'll be well on your way to, again, building a really good foundation for self-advocacy and community advocacy, which is what we want to see. So next slide, please, if we could. So how can teachers, counselors, and others support authentic youth civic engagement? And you have a graph here, you have a graphic here of a little bit of what that says. You have a silhouette of a head in the center, and then it says that the youth, you need an enabling environment. You need enabling, it's an environment where they feel supported, and you need those physical supports for that person to feel supported and able to practice that advocacy. So it is supporting young people in learning to take authority in their own lives. Again, this is in conjunction with teachers, with mentors. Okay, this is understanding spheres of authority that the young person can have. Okay, so, and you're actively encouraging young people to express themselves, whether it's you're giving them physical supports and you're saying, you know, let's talk about events, let's practice speaking, these things. So you're going to seek out opportunities for young people to express in their own way those issues that matter to them. So next slide, if we could. So how do you engage with youth? It is about making it relevant, right? Okay. It's going to be about, well, how do they engage? Whether it's an after school group or whether it's speaking with someone in authority in the school or in the larger community, or what we at YLAN do, Young Leaders and Advocates Network, we encourage folks to start advocacy boards, councils, where they can raise their voices on issues that matter to them. Because when you engage youth actively in the policies that affect them, what you're going to get is more effective policy, which is what we want to see, obviously, because youth, again, are the authority when it comes to speaking about what their concerns are. They are the authority in their own lives. So we want to encourage that and we want to facilitate that. So next slide, please, if you could. So that is my presentation. And now I'm going to hand it over to Christy, and Christy's going to talk about the other aspect of civic engagement.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining this conversation. I think it's really it's a really important topic to make sure that we elevate the youth voices in our schools and in our communities. They are our future. We are slowly seeing a shift in considering youth voices as, you know, a primary source of information and a primary reason to change policy. And so I'm really glad that everybody's here today because you obviously care about this issue. I am going to share a resource with you from the outset right now that predominantly it's what I'm working from in my presentation. Just bear with me a second. Okay. You know what? I'm just going to pop it in the chat. I'm going to pop the link in the chat to the resource so that everybody can open it. That's probably easier. I wanted to share it on the PDF, but unfortunately I'm not seeing it in my screen share option, which is just, you know, par for the course with the Zoom today, from what I understand. All right, this is, DRNY is really involved in creating a lot of resources for all different types of people with disabilities who are either voters or people who are supporting people with disabilities or people who want to get involved in the voting space and the advocacy space in that way. And we've created this toolkit for to make sure that people can can quickly get quick reference to how voting works and what the requirements are for voting and who can vote, and for under what conditions people can vote, what are your voting options. So we created this resource here, and I popped the link in the chat.
Christy, we now see your screen.
Yeah. So I popped this link. This is an online resource. I popped it in the chat. So if you want to open it and then save it on your end, feel free. I hope you do, and I hope you share it widely with your community. This is a voter registration toolkit, and a lot of the information that I'm sharing, that I'm highlighting today, is just directly from this toolkit. But I initially want to ask, I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to kind of go back and forth with that document as I need to. I initially want to talk, or I want to ask everybody a question. So Laura's going to pop a poll question up. I have 4 poll questions. So hopefully everybody can see that in a little, there it is. All right. So the question is, oh, Laura, that's not the right question. Hold on.
Sorry about that.
Okay. You know what? Don't answer that poll question. Here we go. So the first question that I want to ask everyone is, are you registered to vote? And so I would love to hear or I'd love to see these anonymous results, so we won't know who answered it. So I can just get a sense of those in the room and where you're at with your voting status. Looks like we have about 8 people that have responded to the poll question. So some people may be on the phone. So we have 8 out of 8 say that they are registered to vote. They answered yes to that question. If there's any late,
very nice.
Yeah.
Very, very, very nice.
All right. So I'm going to end the poll now. Looks like we have some 100% of the people who responded to the poll questions are registered voters. That's wonderful. Registering to vote is the first step to getting engaged in the voting process. So for people who are eligible to register to vote, you have to register, and then you can go to the polls to vote. That's common knowledge in this group of people. But it's not common knowledge within the school setting. And that's what I wanted to highlight today. Some voter registration basics, and then that we want to share with our youth. It's really crucial to educate our youth from a young age about the voting process. Otherwise, people don't really know how to do it. And then as people get older, it gets more intimidating. And so we want to encourage the conversation from an early age and the practice from an early age. So the toolkit that I shared with you moments ago that you may have up on your browser, we have a page with the voter basics, which is voter registration minimum requirements. And this is a page that is designed, first of all, this resource is designed to be piecemeal. So what that means is if you want a page to post in your organization or in your school or even at home, then you can just print off that single page and post it up, or you can share it as a resource through an email or on social media. Of course, we ask that you attribute the page to Disability Rights New York if you do share through social media. But these are great resources for those sort of, one-pager voter information that can help the community that we serve. So the basics is you have to be a US citizen, you have to live in your current residence for 30 days before an election, and you need to be 18. So that's where it may get a little difficult to explain the difference between, what a youth what the youth can do in terms of voting versus what somebody that's 18 or older can do. So for minors, New York State in 2019 passed a law in the election law that gave an opportunity for pre-registration of minors. What that means is that people who are 16 and 17 can fill out a voter registration form, and in the election that occurs on or immediately after their 18th birthday, they are eligible to vote. So there's no waiting period. You don't have to miss any elections. When the day you turn 18 is the day you're eligible to vote, when you can pre-register to vote. And that's a really important progressive movement, excuse me, development in New York State. Excuse me. New York State tends to, I'm so sorry, guys. I just have something stuck in my throat. I apologize. New York State tends to have less progressive voter laws, and so this is a huge step in the right direction. This law, as well as early voting, was as part of a election expansion in 2019. So it's very, very wonderful that we can now engage the youth in this way in the voting process. All right, I want to ask another poll question. So Laura popped it in. Do you think your vote matters? All right, so we've got 8 people now. So I think the poll, I can end the poll and I'll share the results. And if you can't see the results, the results say 6 people say yes. They
You left
do
it on the
believe.
table, Denise.
Oh, 6 people say that they think their vote matters, and then 1 person thinks their vote doesn't matter. Okay, that I'm actually surprised by how many people believe that their vote matters, and I'm pleasantly surprised. Your vote absolutely matters. It's crucial. Elections are won by very, very, very small margins, especially local elections. However, we have a narrative that I think has been forming maybe since I don't know, for many years, that your vote may not matter, which we see that in elections where we have low turnout. But what we at Disability Rights in New York want to extend is this idea that your vote does matter. Your vote as a person with a disability or a person that is an advocate for the disability community, it matters, it's meaningful, and it's very, very important. So we want to see everybody register to vote and get to the polls and have access to the polls on election day. And what I mean by access is actually going to the polls or voting by absentee ballot and being able to not only get into the door or get your absentee ballot sent to you in an accessible way, but being able to vote privately and independently in the same way that somebody without a disability can vote. So we're really focused on making sure that it's equal access and not some sort of accommodation that is very, very unequal. We got a question that's perfectly timed in the chat. It says, is it true that an individual who's under guardianship cannot vote? Okay, this is a very timely question. I think that this is a question that advocates all over the country are seeking answers for. in New York, in New York, we have to be very careful how we talk about this, especially I'm a lawyer, and so I have to speak in a manner that is maybe different from other non-lawyers, because I am charged with understanding the full scope of the law. And the short answer to that question is, there is a very, very strong argument to say that a person under guardianship does have the right to vote, because only a judge can determine whether or not somebody is incompetent to vote. And under guardianship, even plenary guardianship under 17A, that is not determined. That is not a determination that a judge has to make in placing somebody under a guardianship. And so that's a really key consideration to make. So we take the position at Disability Rights New York that unless you have an order by a judge that says you are incompetent to vote, then you are able to register to vote. A county board of elections could challenge that, because if somebody's under plenary guardianship, 17A guardianship, I think that a county could challenge it. However, because it's never actually been litigated in the court system, we don't know the answer definitively as to whether or not the 17A plenary guardianship eliminates a person's right to vote, because it essentially deems a person incompetent to vote. You can register, a person under guardianship can register to vote as long as a judge has not deemed them incompetent. That issue has been and is being challenged in other states where the plenary guardianship determines on its face within the guardianship that a person is incompetent to vote because of that guardianship status. Okay, there's a long comment. By Sue. Hi, Sue. All right, so I'll just read this out. Sue says, many local League of Women Voter groups have tried very hard to offer support to local schools and students in areas of civic engagement, share information about voter registration, hold voter registration events, etc. And some leagues have, sorry, Sue, my computer's a little sensitive here, and have often been met with a closed door lack of response from high school teachers and administrators. And some leagues reach out to every school district with information and forms. And unfortunately, many teachers' department heads did not respond or share these opportunities with their students. Our local league has in the past sent both students with disabilities and without disabilities to students inside Albany. Thoughts? Okay, yeah, so that I wanted to speak to that as well, to address that issue. Under the 2019 law that requires the state to pre-register minors to vote, there's also in a law passed in the education law that requires school districts or boards of education, not school districts, but boards of education, to implement, basically implement programs that engage students in the voting process. So efforts to engage the student populations to promote student voter registration and pre-registration in schools. So this can include things like voter registration drives, or adding opportunities to have mock voting events in the schools, perhaps adding it in a civics learning course or section of a course, or having assemblies about the issue. But Sue, I will say that yeah, I think that school boards maybe haven't taken that law all that seriously, largely because the law doesn't really give much direction. It just says this needs to be implemented in some way. But our view is that school boards of education need to implement it in a meaningful way with very tailored programs within the school setting. More important, or I guess also equally important, is it needs to be, the efforts need to engage the student population in an inclusive way, in a meaningful way for students with disabilities. So that means that students in special ed programming or out of district placement or on homebound learning, those students need an equal opportunity to get engaged in the voting process in the same way that they're non-disabled, or that students without disabilities are offered the opportunities by the school or by the school boards. Now, when the programs aren't offered to begin with, then that's a problem in and of itself, because that's not making the efforts that the school board is required to make in order to fulfill the education, the requirements in the education law. So disability rights also has educated all the school districts on this issue and this change, or this addition in the law, in the education law. And largely we don't know what it looks like in schools, because the law took effect right before COVID. So that was a problem with getting schools to put some measures in place for the voter engagement pursuant to the new education law, when their school districts were trying, they were scrambling as it was, given the remote work set, or the remote school settings, and then the shifts and the hybrid models and things like that. We're at a point where we're really in a position as advocates to re-engage, reinvigor those advocacy efforts. And it's great to hear that the League of Women Voters is doing that. I know League of Women Voters has been very active for years in the city. So the city schools in New York City, the city schools there have been very, I guess some have been more receptive than others to bringing League of Women Voters to do voter registration. And so if we can just continue to persevere, I think that that's probably, something that established advocacy organizations need to start doing again, and to make sure that in this next school year, these programs are put into place, and and the school boards do what they need to do. All right, so also, let me go back to just the technical aspect of pre-registration, because I think that this is really important. But before I do that, I want to ask the third polling question. All right, this question is, have you ever written or talked with one of your elected leaders to try to resolve an issue in your community? The responses are coming in, and it looks like everyone that answered the poll question has met or written to their elected leaders. I'll just share that the 100%. This is wonderful. Yeah, this is where, I think Shain and I can really connect in understanding in our advocacy efforts, is making sure that people, the youth, and parents and educators and elected leaders understand the need to speak with the youth. And we know that communicating the needs of your, of you and your community that you serve is a very, very effective way to make change. But there's a caveat. It's not an immediate way to make change. Usually, sometimes it is. Sometimes it really, really is. You can get somebody's ear, they can turn around, they can write a bill or some sort of city ordinance, and then before you know it, what you want is in place. But that is the dream scenario that sometimes happens. A lot of times it takes many years, a lot of effort, a lot of doors closed on us. And what I teach is, perseverance, and what I understand and what I try to explain to the people that I work with, when we are facing walls is, we can't give up this fight. None of us, and I don't think anyone in this room is giving up this fight. We have to teach this skill to our youth. And the only way we're going to get to teach this skill is if we get the youth interested and comfortable in speaking with their elected leaders that can make the changes happen that they want to see. It's real. The youth have a real strong voice, although sometimes quieter than adults, and that sometimes that quietness or lack of experience and exposure is really their most valuable asset in the conversation. And I'll give you a couple examples. A couple weeks ago, or maybe like a month and a half now, I sat into a Department of Transportation meeting about airlines. It was a large nationwide meeting, and I just sat in to listen to the issues. There were many people who were invited to speak. One of our own New Yorkers was on, Keith Gerge. Some of you may know if you are in the advocacy space. But the most powerful of all the people who spoke, the most powerful voice, the voice that everybody was going back to and referencing, was a 16-year-old minor who wanted an opportunity to fly in an airplane, but explained that they will probably never get an opportunity to, given their disability, because the airplanes are not accessible to them. It was an incredibly moving yet very conversational based communication, but 90% of the people that spoke after this person spoke referenced that 16-year-old. And I believe that was to the regulators listening in on that conversation, that was a moment that they will not forget, and that will drive them to make a regulatory change in the airlines. I'll give you a second, more localized example, not disability related necessarily, but one of my neighbors, I live upstate, and one of my neighbors wanted to raise chickens in her yard, and she is 10. She went to her city representative, and then she went to all the representatives, and then she got a petition signed. And now we are able to raise chickens in our yard because a 10-year-old wrote a bill wrote an ordinance that was, probably heavily edited. But because of that, we're now able to raise chickens. And for people with disabilities, that may be a really great way to engage with the community by, you know, being outside in your neighborhood, caring for your chickens. They could be, you know, considered, maybe perhaps somebody has chickens and they're emotional support animals. Well, now they don't have to go through a zoning ordinance in order to have that animal on their property. So a 10-year-old in my community passed our chicken ordinance, and that was wonderful. And it really showed the value of the youth voice. And it's something that we can encourage our own children and the children in our community, the children in our schools, not only to learn the process, but to actually do it and try it, give it a try. And you may have a failure, but you also may have a wild success that an adult in your community, perhaps with a similar situation, you know, may not have the same impactful voice. So I hope that those stories are inspirational. I know I find great inspiration in them. But so getting back to sort of the technical aspect of pre-registration, and just speaking to elected officials, understanding what elected officials do and how they make important changes from a local level to a federal level. It's just really important to get informed. I want to pop up hold on. Oh, I wanted to just cover the local election, the importance of a local election, because I think that's sometimes lost on people, because we hear so much about, you know, the president of the United States and the, you know, our senators and House representatives in the federal government, but we don't often hear the incredible work that our local leaders are doing for our communities, or in some cases, the really negative policies that are put into place that really harm people with disabilities. So local elections, we know from data, have a very, very insignificant voter turnout compared to our federal elections. And that's ironic, because our local leaders are often not only more invested, but also, you know, more powerful to serve the needs of the community in daily ways. Mental health care in your county, policing, the library resources, the school, you know, even, you know, your school board election, they are operating the school that our, you know, that our children are attending, and in our schools are providing a lot of services to the students that we serve. The local elections are just so incredibly important to get involved in, and you know, speaking to local leaders is just a very, very powerful way to make change in your community in a way that is manageable, that we can see, that's very, very tangible. All right, so I want to pop up our fourth polling question. Just give us a second. There we go. All right, this is about children and your engagement. Have you ever talked with your children or student about voting? All right, it looks like we have a few responses coming in, and they're all yes, we have talked about voting with our children or students. So I'll share those results. All right, well, that's great. I mean, again, speaking with students is important. And as Sue Ruff mentioned earlier, we want to see our school boards following their mandate pursuant to the education law, where they are also speaking to the students within their school and creating programs that help that can help engage the youth population in the voting process. So just a few takeaways here about the getting youth involved and knowledgeable about the election process is, again, pre-registration can start at 16 years old. We want to encourage people to email or communicate in some way with elected officials. Get involved in campaigns or shadow campaigns or elected leaders in some way so you can really understand the process. Students have a really great opportunity if their school has student councils. Going back to the chicken ordinance, going to community meetings like your city council meetings, that's where you can raise these issues through writing, written letters that you can then read in these meetings. That is where the chicken ordinance came about in my community, and it was the 10-year-old individual. She just read out a letter of request, and then it went from there. So it's very, very important. School board meetings, they're open to the public, and that's another place where we can make change. I'm probably speaking to the choir here when I say that, because maybe everybody's been in this room has been to a school board meeting. Following local laws and topics of interest, and local and state, of course, because just following them, supporting them, or opposing them, these are all sort of benign ways to get involved, but they're incredibly impactful. And then finally, making written comments, written correspondence is kept on the record. It has to be reviewed. It has to be considered carefully, and having schools or encouraging your own children to get involved in practice your writing skills by writing to an elected official about an issue that you're concerned about. That's a great way to sort of practice paragraphs or practice essay writing. I mean, these are all really persuasive writing, developing persuasive writing skills. This can all be incorporated into education programming. So I have just, rattled off a bunch of information for everyone, and I hope that we can sort of get involved, get this conversation going. If anybody has any questions. Okay, so we do have something in the chat. How can we make choices like who's running for what office? The options of who the young people will even have to vote for more interesting, accessible to them. Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, because that goes beyond this concept of voting, and that goes into the concept of becoming an elected official. And I think that obviously there are age requirements, but teaching people, the importance of voting and the importance of elected leadership at a very young age will make the idea of running for office more relevant, and so that that knowledge can empower more people to feel confident to get into the space. But yeah, I mean, the point is, I understand the point. It's like there are very few inspirational young leaders out there that we can vote for. And so increasing that pool of people is sort of a community-wide effort that needs to be made. Yeah, and so another comment is I hear a lot of people don't want to vote because they simply don't understand. And that is exactly sort of, what Shain and I have, that's the whole point of our presentation. I hope that wasn't lost on everybody, is like empowering people with knowledge, because people who have knowledge can understand the value. And I think that goes for, yeah, Shain.
Sure. Yeah, I'll jump in. I mean, thank you, Christy, for that. And also thank you for the question, because that is such a relevant question, which is how do we make, in this case, voting and civic engagement relative to young people? And it goes to education, and it goes to sort of, what they say is, you can't be what you can't see. So show them those initiatives that are being worked on that are relevant to young people. Show them how those community events and those community engagements affect their lives. Give them opportunities and show them opportunities where they can be those agents of change. And then they will see, in this case, that, voting, that it is relevant for them. But no, that's an excellent question. And thank you so much for bringing it up. That's something that we at the Young Leaders and Advocates Network definitely address. And we are, learning from the people that we engage with is to how do we make that relevant for young people? Again, whether it's the student councils, whether it's advocacy boards, there's a lot of things you can do as an educator or an ally or a young person to plant that seed and nurture that seed of, what civic engagement is something that helps me and affects me, not even later, but right now, in terms of being the person that I want to see and having the kind of community that I want to see for myself. But excellent question. Thank you so much for bringing it up.
Yeah, and so there was also a comment about what offices on the local ballot. I'm not sure that was a question or just a comment, but what I want to elaborate on there is, yeah, a lot of people don't even know what's on the local ballot because they don't even care to go to the polls on election day for local races, and that's a problem. That is an issue that we have with voting, because we downplay the importance of the most important elections for our daily life. And teaching people about the importance, or even just like mentioning it to your neighbors, like, hey, did you know it's election day today? That can go far, because if you ask people to go to the polls, then they might actually go to the polls, because if you care about, somebody, if you're canvassing for somebody or whatever, if the students or the community, your neighbors are engaged in a local election, the likelihood is that more people will go to vote at that local election. In my community, this past fall, one of my neighbors ran for a seat in the city council, and that neighbor went to she met every single resident in our what's called ward or district, and it was the highest local voter turnout in decades. Because that person put the effort into making sure that everybody knew, first of all, that there was an election, secondly, how they could vote and the days that they could vote, and then followed up to make sure that they were voting. These are the efforts that, if we had that information coming from schools at a young age, then maybe later on, when an individual is an adult, it would just be in their repertoire of things to do as an adult anyway, and it would be, it would take less effort. So that's really where I'd like to see us go.
Sure. So, and absolutely, just to echo that as well, what we really say, what we really think is that nurturing that civic engagement, voting is going to be the result of years and years, or, of that civic engagement seed being planted already. So voting is absolutely critical, but there's so much also from a young person's perspective. And Christy, you did a great job of mentioning this, that comes in addition to or before voting. But absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I know that we're a small group here. if anyone else has any thoughts that they want to share, please unmute and tell us your thoughts or your concerns or what you want to see, or give us ideas. That would be really helpful. But if not, you know, we can just end a little bit early.
I just want to remind to anybody participating by phone, which I'm not sure that we do have anyone participating by phone, but to unmute, you can press *6.
All right, well, if nobody wants to chime in, I will just tell you all some updates to one big update to the voting dates is that there will now be 2 primaries in New York because our redistricting failed the judicial scrutiny. And now we will have a primary election in June, at the end of June, and we will also have one at an undetermined date at this time for our federal primaries in August or September. They're not quite sure. I don't know of a date has been set yet. And then a general election. This is a midterm election, is in November with early voting dates 9 days prior to the election. So I hope everybody gets out the vote and shares the information. We will be updating our voter registration toolkit with the dates. So check back probably like late next week if you want those dates in the toolkit to post. Please share that information.
Just thought I would share real quick. This is Lee speaking. I'm actually going for the training this afternoon at 5 o'clock to become a poll inspector. So having the opportunity to take this, whatever you want to call it, webinar today was kind of awesome. So thank you guys.
Oh, that's so
Our pleasure.
great, Lee. Yeah, that's so great. And actually, we have, Lee, we have a poll worker guide. I'm going to pop it in the chat that you can use, and it might give you some information about, or some insight about what you can you can have some focus on to help the disability community make sure that the polling locations and the program in general is as accessible as possible. I'm so happy. Poll worker engagement is absolutely incredible. So I encourage everybody who can to be a poll worker at some point in your life. It is not volunteer. You make money doing it. So that's a plus.
All right. Well, thank you both so much for offering this information. And also thank you to our captioner for captioning this presentation and for the other presentations that you've been captioning throughout the day. I hope everybody got to attend some sessions today that they found really helpful and learned something new.